While most of the moves this offseason for the Sacramento Kings have been about bringing players back, one of the few new faces, Chris Duarte, was acquired from the Indiana Pacers for just a pair of second-round picks. On today's Locked On Kings podcast, Tony East, the host of the Locked On Pacers podcast, shares why he thinks this is a great deal for the Sacramento Kings and provides context on Domantas Sabonis and Chris Duarte's relationship from Indiana right here on the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all off-season long. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer from ABC 10 News. And Kings, Indiana Pacers trades starting to become a common thing now. Of course, the big blockbuster between Domantas Sabonis and Tyrese Halliburton. And then a much smaller but still fairly significant Chris Duarte for a pair of second-round draft picks trade that happened a little bit earlier this offseason. I've been talking with Sacramento Kings fans who've been mildly excited to, hey, I think Chris Duarte could really help this Kings team win. But everybody looks at Duarte's numbers and goes back to the context of last season, and they see a pretty significant drop-off. Duarte from his rookie season to his sophomore season, dealing with injury issues, his shooting plummeting, his scoring per game plummeting. Of course, there's a lot of different factors that fed into that, not just the injuries, but the departure of Domantas Sabonis, the addition of Tyrese Halliburton and Buddy Hield, and the change of Indiana Pacers play style. These are all things that Tony East from the Locked On Pacers podcast is going to give us context on. So I'm very excited about this interview, very excited about this podcast. Tony's phenomenal. He and I have done many crossover episodes over the past handful of seasons with the amount of connections and moves between these two teams. So I am happy to have Tony East back. If you want to share your thoughts on Chris Duarte, the trade, anything that Tony and I talk about, if you're watching on YouTube, please do that in the YouTube comment section down below. And you can always reach me too on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack, or you can email me mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. But for now, here's my conversation with the host of the Locked On Pacers podcast, Tony East. After I saw the Sacramento Kings acquired Chris Duarte from the Indiana Pacers, maybe not as big of a splash between these two teams, but a little bit of deja vu, and had to have Tony East back on the Locked On Kings podcast because now the Kings and Pacers are just infinite trade partners for the rest of time, it seems like. We might as well just combine shows at this point, Tony. But when I reached out to you about Chris Duarte, you said you'd come on the show, and then you sent to me you thought this was a really good trade for the Sacramento Kings. Can you explain a little bit why you feel that way?
Yeah, Duarte, so to be clear, I get why the Pacers traded him when they did and for the value they did. I don't think they traded him for less than his maximum value, but he had a really great first year, and the Kings can do some of the things that allowed him to do that, and the Pacers, as constructed, couldn't as much, right? And so I think like I said on Locked On Pacers, I would have held out for late first value for him, and the Kings got him for better than that. And so from a value perspective, I felt like it was a good trade for the Kings. And again, the Pacers have so many 2s and 3s that Chris wouldn't have been in the rotation at all. Like, moving him made a ton of sense for them. But the Kings being able to be the team that pounces in, uses their cap space to not have to match salaries, to get him, even if it was 2 good firsts, I think that was a great trade for them. He'll fit well. He'll play in their rotation. He certainly has minutes coming his way. Their style will fit him better. Like, just for everything Chris Duarte could have potentially wanted, I have not spoken to him, to be clear. I feel like this is a good basketball trade for him and for the Kings. And even though the Pacers' value was less than I would held out for, I feel like, it makes sense why they did it. So, yeah, I thought from a value perspective, the Kings did a great job.
Over the 2 seasons of covering Duarte in Indiana, his rookie season significantly better than his sophomore season. Of course, a lot of changes in between then, which we're going to get into in a second. But Chris Duarte, the person, Chris Duarte, the player, like, what stands out to you about him and what he's bringing to Sacramento?
Yeah, he started playing basketball so late, and so when he came to Indiana originally, like, his English is way better now, but it wasn't like perfect at the time, right? So he was never the chattiest guy, at least around us, until like in the middle of this past season, which was really fun to see him kind of grow in that way. But yeah, great dude by all accounts. He's really family oriented. Like when he goes on road trips, he always talks about how much he misses his son Chris Jr. He loves spending time with them, playing basketball with his family. If you check his Instagram for 2 seconds, you'll see all sorts of Chris Duarte family content, and that's kind of what he's all about, and working hard for them. And his basketball journey has been so unique that I think that influences his personality within the game too. Like he went to JUCO for 2 years, like was not supposed to be NBA level good, and now is clearly NBA level good and was a lottery pick. So he's still fairly humble in all of those settings. And so just a great dude to interact with. I really enjoyed all my time with him personally, and it was fun to see him kind of evolve as a human being as well because of his unique background.
This is where I love that you're a podcast host, Tony, because I expect you could go like 5 minutes on this. And if you want to go for it, I'm here to listen. What do you think was more of an impact on Chris's drop off from 13 points per game to about 8 points per game? His playing time dropped off. Was it Sabonis leaving, or was it the addition of Tyrese Halliburton and Buddy Hield?
Are those my only two options?
Add a third. Like I said, bring it on.
Okay. Thing number one, ankle injuries screwed him up so bad last year, right? He like kind of struggled at the start of the year, but he was still firmly in the rotation. And then he had a 30-point game in Brooklyn. He looked awesome. It looked like he was gelling with his team. Very next game, turns his ankle in the first quarter, misses 6 weeks. And then during that time, Pacers are a new team, right? Like Aaron Nesmith gets chemistry with these guys. They start all of a sudden building out their new rotation. So when Duarte comes back, his role's different, and he's still recovering, and he missed a long time. So he slowly got a little better. He had a really nice game in Boston. He's rounding into form. Hurts the same ankle again, right? Like it just kept happening. It happened in March too. So he only played 46 games. That was part of it, is the timing of the injuries themselves certainly hurt him. This is not necessarily Sabonis Halliburton related, but I will attribute it to them for this discussion. Is the thing that happened when that trade happened is the Pacers' play style totally changed, right? Their seconds per offensive possession went way down. Halliburton's obviously this open floor guy. Their pace goes up. All this stuff is important for the Pacers, obviously. Duarte's definitely better. I've kind of described him as a rule follower on offense. Like he's told what to do, so he does it. And with the Pacers, who played random, that's not all true, but that's the word that was used to describe. I think that was a little harder for him. Whereas in situations like the Kings do, where there's a lot of like similar pet actions run over and over again, he knows how to handle that. He knows how to react to that. He knows where to be. And so Sabonis is great for that. And they have a great connection we'll talk about later. Whereas the Pacers style specifically was less good for that. And that was really interesting because like he still fit what they did. Like I cited this stat a bunch on Locked On Pacers. Like you can see on you look at a guy's shot profile, you can see how many shots they took that were like open, very open, tight, or very tight. Like his percentage of shots that you'd classify as open or wide open, just as a percentage of his shots, went up from year 1 to 2 of his career. Like the Pacers found ways to get him open. He found ways to get to his spots and take open shots. So in theory, they knew how to use him. He knew what to do to attack. They just never went in, right? So at what point is it, if he had infinite tries with the shots he had last year with the Pacers, would his percentages have gone up? Or was it just that it was such a rushed style that he wasn't used to that they would never have gone up? Or was it just a small sample size of 46 games where they never went in? I don't know, but they never went in. So he stopped playing as much. And so I think that as he got better. Like it's not like he didn't get better. He just didn't make shots. And so I'm curious what that all looks like for him in year 3. And now I've been rambling for a while, but this is podcasting. That's what we do. Because I said after his rookie year, my biggest projection for Chris Duarte is that I think he's going to be an elite shooter or close to elite shooter. Like even if the rest of his skills don't come around, I really, really believe in his 3-point shot. And now I look like an idiot because he shot like 32% this past season or something like that. But I still think his shooting is his highest quality trait. So if he's in a situation where he's still getting those open shots, he can understand it from a speed perspective a little better. And yeah, it's a fresh start. It'll take him a while to get going, but he has that connection with Sabonis. I think the Kings are a good spot for him to, if he gets that similar shot profile in terms of how open they are, have a bounce back year in terms of percentages. Again, I think it's a great trade for the Kings. So I just said a lot of stuff and maybe none of it actually is important to what you wanted to hear, but that is kind of my take on his season last year and why it kind of went awry from his really great rookie year where he was like coming out of the gate scoring 27 points in the first game.
No, I thought it was all great. And one of the things that I noticed with what you were talking about there, you said that like you point to his shooting and you point out his shooting. And when Duarte spoke at the media in Las Vegas, when he was asked about what he brings to Sacramento, the first thing he said is, I'm a shooter. Like that's the part of his game that he clearly identified. And of course, he was asked about his defense, and we'll get into his defense in a little bit. And but the fact that he feels that that's what he's bringing to the table, especially on the offensive end. And I'm sure, I mean, I know Chris is smart. I know he looks at what the Sacramento Kings do and also is familiar with Domantas Sabonis from his time in Indiana and knows I'm going to need to shoot and I'm going to need to hit shots and I'm going to get a lot of open looks in Sacramento if I'm going to be playing consistently for Mike Brown and in that Kings offense. So, I mean, I think you and he are on the same page in that sense with the shooting, but he was also asked about his relationship with Domantas Sabonis, and he just gushed about the guy. Talked about how great of a leader he is, how he took him under his wing his rookie season in Indiana, how important he was to him. Like the ankle injury is absolutely a good point that I didn't even think to ask about. But I also don't think, Tony, it's a coincidence that Duarte, I don't know if it's lost confidence, is less comfortable. I mean, you mentioned the offense significantly changing with the departure of Domantas Sabonis. How do you feel the two of them are going to reconnect? And do you expect that relationship and even their on-court success together to blossom beyond even what we saw that rookie season in Indy?
Yeah, I know you retweeted it, but like they were really close. And when the Pacers went out to Sacramento this year, obviously the story was all about Halliburton that day specifically. But, I was really interested like who Sabonis connected with. And, he had his wine conversations with TJ McConnell, and they went out to dinner, and Chris was a part of that group because they were closest people, like beyond the floor specifically, which matters a lot, of course, for the Kings. I think their families know each other. They now both have kids who are young. Like they're just close, and they're close in age, despite Duarte being a draft pick 2 years ago, which I'm sure you'll ask about at some point. But they're as people very tight, which I think is, of course, why he's going to gush about him as a person and leader. And they grew close with the Pacers. Their chemistry, I wish I had their numbers in front of me, but the Pacers did well with both of them on the floor. Like they just looked like a good partnership. And the thing Sabonis is good at, like you've seen it a million times, Kevin Huerter, DHO pitch, bucket. Like Duarte can do a lot of that stuff, but there's also just like he understands where to stand when Sabonis has the ball to like know that he'll get a pass if he needs to and all that kind of stuff. Like their connection is just really strong on the floor in terms of those common actions. And that's why I think it's so good is it's not just like if you cut Tyrese Halliburton might find you. If not, like reset, let's do something else. Let's get into something else. Like it's like you're intentionally setting up an action that he's involved in, and he's better at that. And that's neither style is better or worse. But I think in terms of their connection specifically, they'll pair well together again. I don't know what Chris will expect role-wise out in Sacramento, but I assume they'll play together quite a bit. I mean, they just invested quite a bit of money in Sabonis. So, they fit really well together because of those little two-man game things that Sabonis is so good at, because he himself is also kind of that rule follower type where he's like, okay, I feel a switch, I'll pass. I don't feel a switch, I'm going to be the bully. Like all this stuff that he's so good at. Duarte is also good at reading and reacting to. So I'll be curious how he fits with Fox and all these other guys, but those two specifically should pair well, both on the floor and off.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Birddogs. Birddogs make you look good. Their stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. They do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit way better. They fit as great as you could want for if you're active, if you're out like playing golf or doing something where you're moving around, maybe you're going on a hike or something like that. But you can also wear their shorts and wear their pants on semi-casual or semi-formal events where you want to look your best. Birddogs also uses anti-sting sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. That's particularly helpful here during the summertime. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or enter promo code LockedOnNBA for a free Yeti style tumbler. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA or promo code LockedOnNBA. Get your free Yeti style tumbler and give yourself the look that you want. Give yourself the comfort that you deserve by getting Birddogs. You won't want to take them off. I promise you. Speaking of Duartes Role, on yesterday's Locked On Kings podcast, I tried to predict Mike Brown's rotation. And when it came to Chris Duarte, I think it's pretty expected that with Davion Mitchell and Malik Monk on this roster, of course, behind Fox and Huerter, the 1 and 2 spots are pretty locked up. So I see Duarte's fit in Sacramento, his role in Sacramento being as a backup 3, kind of holding down that backup 3 spot. Of course, Mike Brown likes to stagger his rotations and things like that. So who knows where specifically he's
No,
going
I have
to
to cut
fit
you
in.
off because I have this vendetta in Indiana where I have been calling Chris Duarte a wing for forever because he can shoot and he guards wings. Like he guarded wings for the Pacers his rookie year when he was at his best. Like Kevin Durant was like, dang, this dude's cold. Like he was good at that. And all these people in Indiana were calling him a guard for forever and be like, why do you keep calling him a 3? I'm like, because he guards threes. He's a 3 to me. Anyway, carry on.
No, perfect. That's what I wanted to hear. So I was curious about your thoughts on his fit at that 3 spot. No idea how many minutes he's going to get, but clearly the Sacramento Kings think he can fit on offense and he can help improve their defense. He's not going to change their defense overnight, but he can help improve the team defense, which everybody needs to do on this Kings roster this year. So I think like if we're projecting Chris Duarte's fit in Sacramento, I think day one we're seeing him as a backup 3.
I think that's a great role for him. Yeah, look up like his rookie year. You know, Westbrook, LeBron, KD, all these guys were like, "Oh, this Duarte kid's like awesome," because he was playing good defense and shooting like crazy that year. Yeah, I always have kind of ascribed to this theory that like if you can guard a position, you can play that position, and he guards threes. So to me, he can play the 3 very easily and the 2. And that alone is why I've called him a wing for forever. He is 6'6", like. People clown height in the NBA because it's all fake and not possible to like pin down. But I've stood next to him and Aaron Nesmith and Benedict Mather and all these guys. Like he was the tallest of the 3 names I just said. Like he is actually potentially 6'6". So yeah, I think he can play the 3, and I think backup 3. Like he's not going to start, like obviously. So I think backup 3 is a really good spot for him on the Kings. I don't know what that minutes will look like. Maybe at 15. I don't know. You'd have to come up with the number. You know their rotation better than me, but that makes a ton of sense to me. I just think the tricky part, if he is the backup 3, is making sure his minutes overlap with Domas when you can. And I did just pull them up while you were talking. Pacers net rating 2 years ago when both Duarte and Sabonis were on the court was plus 1.5. With just Duarte, no Sabonis, minus 6.5. With just Sabonis, no Duarte, minus 3.1, right? Like, clearly, they got the most out of each other. And, yeah, they started. So, like, it was the best other 3 players around them. But they pair well together. So, finding a way to play Chris as the backup 3 while also having Sabonis out there will be a Mike Brown experience. But I think he's better at the 3 than the 2, given his skills. So, that seems very natural to me, even though I don't think people really think of him that way.
The universal problem for Mike Brown has to be, how can I get every single player out there at some point to play with Domantas Sabonis? Because everybody plays so well off of him, and Sabonis is such a good passer, a willing passer, such a good team player. Like, you have to get Kevin Huerter out there with him.
How about this? When the Kings play, when Sabonis is in, they can play 8 guys against 5, and when he's out, they have to play like 2 or 3 on 5.
I don't like that idea because Sabonis is already being run ragged in Sacramento with his playing time with a broken thumb, and the Kings would play him 48 minutes if that were the case. But like we've talked about, Sasha Vezenkov needs to get some time playing with Sabonis. Chris Duarte needs to play with Sabonis. Of course, De'Aaron Fox needs to play with Sabonis. Mike Brown has a tough test to figure out. But then again, in terms of roster building, you're doing a great job finding pieces to surround your star 2 guys and Fox and Sabonis with. So, having watched Duarte every day, Tony, or every single game of his career really to this point, like, what stands out to you that you don't think is really talked about? It could be negative or it could be positive, just anything that you think fans will notice and we will notice watching Chris Duarte play basketball every single day.
I think the thing that stands out to me is you can kind of tell how effective the result of his play is going to be about 1 second after he catches the ball. If he catches it and immediately puts it on the floor and gets to the cup or immediately shoots it, generally good, like a good result's going to happen from that possession, or like a good shot's going to go up, one that you're not mad that he took or that someone else took. When he kind of stops and assesses and thinks about getting to his spot, that, like, his passing isn't that great. That's when he is really limited, because sometimes he'll go into this like mid-post shot that he fades away on. And his rookie year, he made a bajillion of them. And last year he made none, if I had to guess. I mean, that's not actually right, but you know, he goes to this little, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, it's kind of like the shot DeAndre Ayton takes a lot, except he's 6'6" instead of 7 feet tall. And so it's fine. It goes in enough. But that, first of all, that's part of why I projected him as a good shooter. Because I was like, man, if you're this good of a tough shot maker, like when the shots are easier, they're just going to go in. But he gets to that too much, and he's not that great of a passer at all. So if he kind of stops and assesses, and the defense knows they have time to crowd him a little bit, he's just going to reset the play or make the easy, obvious read. So that's something Mike Brown, I think, will have to connect with him on is, what's the whole Spurs model called? Like the 0.5, 0.5 seconds after catch, you get dribble it, shoot it, pass it, right? And that always looks good when it happens and it's clicking, and sometimes it can lead to mistakes. But for Duarte specifically, if he can get in that mindset every game, like that's something that always has stood out to me about him is when he's at his best, he knows what he's going to do right when he catches the ball, whether that's because of the way the defense is covering him, whether that's because of how he's been set up all game, whether that's because he's locked into the scouting report. I don't know what that was for game to game for him specifically, but those kind of things I think are really important for him because like you can look at the percentages last year. His mid-range percentage was just awful. It was just not a shot he should be going to. From 10 to 16 feet, he was 27.3%. Long twos, he was 30%. Like, just don't take them. But in his rookie year, he made them. So he kept going to him. And I get why. It's not the shot he should be hunting for, but sometimes he goes for it. He's not the greatest at getting all the way to the rim, but he does finish well when he finishes mostly well when he gets there. At least he did his first year. So I think for him, it's just going to be about cleaning up that decision-making right when he catches the ball, knowing what to do, all sorts of stuff like that. That was very long-winded, but that is always something that stood out to me is like I could tell very quickly after he caught the ball how effective he was about to be on that touch.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, baseball fans, take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel, and you can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, whether you win or you lose. That's $200 that you can spend betting on anything from the money line to the over under to who you think is going to hit the first home run of the game, all on the app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to place a bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Of course, they have great betting for football season, basketball season, so many sports. Sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, I have to ask about it before we wrap up so we can put it to bed. Domantas Sabonis just got an extension with the Kings. Tyrese Halliburton just got a massive extension with the Indiana Pacers. Like, it frustrated me when the narrative this season turned from, oh my God, what are the Kings doing, to, oh, now it's a win-win for both teams. But now, I mean, it is a tremendous win-win for both teams. And the real concern with the Sabonis trade from the Kings' perspective was, do the Kings potentially lose him for nothing? And then they traded away Tyrese Halliburton and control over Tyrese for basically a couple season rental of Sabonis. That's in the past. The Kings have Sabonis under contract for the next 5 years. Who knows if he'll fill that? Of course, Tyrese Halliburton just signed his max extension with the Indiana Pacers. Now I'm looking at it from the perspective of both teams. Like, you wish trades happen like this more. Like, you wish this was the result more, especially for a team in the West versus a team in the East. At this point, Tony, I think it's cool because Kings fans can now truly wholeheartedly root for Tyrese in Indiana, which they were doing already, without having to worry about losing Sabonis. And Pacers can do the same thing with Domas and Sacramento. Pacers fans can. I think this is really, I think it's going to be a fun trade storyline to revisit years down the road and talk about how maybe that kickstarted two franchises to ultimately opening a championship window one day.
It says a lot about how popular both guys still are with their old fan base, right? Like, they're both just good and good dudes and interesting and stylistically unique in a way that's enjoyable. And yeah, they just signed, what is it, like $500 million of contracts?
That helps.
Like two days apart or something like that. So I think that alone kind of makes it a win-win. Have you seen the comparison for the Kings where it's like the Kings are a farmer and Halliburton's a Ferrari and Sabonis is a tractor? Have you seen that thinking before?
No.
Okay.
No, it doesn't surprise me with Cowtown, Sacramento, though.
I saw this tweet forever ago. It's like, pretend the Kings are a farmer, Halliburton's a Ferrari, and Sabonis is like the world's greatest tractor. Like, the farmer needs the tractor more. That's better for them, even if everyone else is like, oh, the Ferrari's cooler. And now that comparison's kind of dumb because he just made All-NBA, and it's like he's amazing. But, I saw that when the trade happened. I was like, that's a really good way of putting it. So, yeah, I'm excited I get to cover Tyrese for the next 6 years, and I'm happy for Sabonis that he's by wine country and he gets to play with Chris again, and he's on a really good team, and he just got paid too. I think everybody's happy. The funniest part of this now to me, Matt, is anytime either of them gets asked about the trade, they get asked, Let me be very clear.
Tyrese especially.
They get asked.
Yes.
And people go, oh, they'll never stop talking about it. I'm like, he got asked.
Yeah, it's Tyrese.
What's he supposed to do? Like, be a douche? I don't know. That always makes me mad. But yeah, I'm happy for both those guys and both fan bases for where they're headed. And you said you had to bring up one more Kings Pacers thing. Man, how close were we to having to do a Harrison Barnes Locked On Pacers episode? It felt like for a second there.
I thought it was going to happen. And I would have liked that too. Although, like, having 2/3 of the Kings starting, or 3/5 of the Kings starting lineup from 2 seasons ago might not have been the best path for the Indiana Pacers. But I'm glad HB is back in Sacramento. But there was a good portion of time, especially when contract talks were kind of dying down. I was like, man, Harrison's going to be a Pacer. Like, it just felt like it was going to happen, but there are better future options out there for Indiana, better routes that they can go. And I'm very happy that Harrison is still here in Sacramento. So you know what, Tony, screw it. Let's just combine teams, like combine the Pacers and combine the Kings right now. We might have gross, a legitimate,
they would be so good.
A lot of offense, that's for sure. Yeah. Buddy Hield might not play though. I hate to break it to him.
I'd have to think about that, but yeah, I don't know I don't think he would. Herter, Brown, who would the wings be? Herter, Brown, Matherin, and Monk, probably.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
It would be a fun exercise to do one day. Well, Tony, of course, you do such a phenomenal job covering the Pacers. Off-season, regular season does not matter. It's always fun when the Pacers and Kings match up. I hope you're able to make it out to Sacramento again this year. I hope I'm able to make it out to Indiana at some point to watch a game, because the Pacers for many years were my Eastern Conference team when Danny Granger was there. So I would love to come out there and experience it with you. I know you just got back from Vegas too, so I know how busy you are. Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it, and I hope you're right about Chris Duarte becoming an elite shooter, because the Kings can always use it.
I hope I'm right too, just so I'm right. Thanks for the time, man.
Shout out Tony. Really appreciate him joining me on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast. So how are you feeling about Chris Duarte now? Are you a little more excited about it? You feeling kind of the same? What are you expecting from Duarte? I really like the fact that Tony was so gung-ho about Duarte being a 3. He thinks Duarte's a 3, and that's really the role that at least we believe he's going to be playing here in Sacramento. So that made me happy to hear, plus all the great context about his relationship with Domas and what happened last season. So again, if you want to respond to anything, you can do so at any time. Reach out to Tony as well. And if you have any issue or any interest at all in the Indiana Pacers, you just want to follow Tyrese Halliburton's career, you want to find out what the hell's going on with Buddy Hield, you want to find out anything Indiana Pacers, make sure you're listening to the Locked On Pacers podcast. Tony East does a phenomenal job over there, and I really appreciate him taking the time. For now, we are done. Thank you so much, as always, for listening to this episode of the Locked On Kings podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit subscribe, turn on that notification bell, share with your friends, of course, and get involved in the conversation in the comment section. My audio listeners, you know how much I appreciate you, my OGs from the very beginning of this podcast. You're amazing. If you haven't left a review already, on Apple Podcasts, please do so. You can hit 5 stars, and there's a little area there for a custom review. Just share your thoughts on the podcast, why you like the podcast, why you'd encourage others to listen, even any constructive criticism that you might have about the show, you can leave there as well. I appreciate that and read that and take that all to heart. And then my Spotify listeners, there's no custom area for you to leave a review, but you can hit 5 stars, and that helps me out a ton as well. Thank you so much for your support. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of Locked On Kings. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.